Welcome everyone to the Rixon Technology Podcast. I am your host, Heidi Trost, and I am joined by Sean Vassilaros. I had to actually look at his name to be able to pronounce it, and he is from KANNY. So Sean is a proud Rixon customer, and he was really kind enough to take the time to chat with me today about what he's been doing, what KANNY has been doing, and he also has his hands in some other projects as well at Lehigh University. So give us just the elevator pitch for KANNY. What does KANNY do? What are you guys up to?
Yeah, so I'll kind of tell a little bit of a story behind it, which is I've been an executive. My background is in building and running technology companies, primarily in the healthcare and life sciences space. But I've hired hundreds and hundreds of people. And I look back at my career of hiring and I see a massive gap in my ability to hire the right people. I mean, there's lots of ways to hire the right person based on their kind of hard skills and even their soft skills. But what I realized is one of the biggest indicators and primary indicators, I think, of success and even culture fit is someone's character, like their honesty. Do they act with integrity? Do they treat others with respect? Do they take feedback with humility? Are they confident to do the job? Do they have the grit to do tough things? Are they accountable for their actions? And I, as a hiring manager, wish I could know that information about the person I'm bringing in. Well, we found a way to measure character in a candidate. And it's done in a very unique and interesting way. And it's done in a way that's verified and safe and it protects the privacy and dignity of all parties. And we found a way to measure character of a candidate. And that's really what KANNY is set out to do.
Asking themselves how do you do this, right? Like what is the secret sauce? How do you measure character?
Yeah. Well, so think about this, right? You cannot credibly tell me about your character. Heidi, are you humble? Heidi, are you accountable? I mean, Heidi, are you honest, right? Like you could tell me those answers and I believe that you are all those things. But at the end of the day, someone that I don't know telling me the answers to those is disingenuous, right? So we have to start with the fact and the belief that one cannot credibly tell another about their character. It has to be observed. So what KANNY figured out and found out is there are people that have observed you in action that are credible enough to be able to tell us about your character. And those are people that you've worked with currently or in the past, people who have seen you in the trenches, people who have seen you deliver or not, right? And so we found a way to get candid, but completely confidential reviews from your previous coworkers. And so it's kind of like what you wish reference checks would do, right? So if you think about the way the reference check currently works, it's, hey, give me a list of, 3 people. Typically, it's your 3 champions. They're going to tell me amazing things about you. I'm going to check the box that I ran this reference check, and then we're going to move on. You don't really learn a ton about them. Sometimes you get a red flag, but most of the times it's a box checking exercise. I learn a little bit and I move on. Well, what if we could line up 10 of their previous coworkers and anonymously ask them very simple questions about this person's character, confirming that we protect their anonymity, that's absolutely paramount in what we do. We protect their anonymity, we gather and aggregate that data, and we generate insights.
I would imagine that you would need a lot of trust, right? To get people to be authentic and to say what they really want to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on something super interesting there, is like trust is actually the primary word that we throw around as an organization, right? We need those filling out these requests to trust that we're going to protect their identity, right? We need those that are signing up as candidates or as people looking for their own professional development to trust that we'll find the right people and that the insights they'll get are real, right? We need our customers, who are primarily talent organizations and third-party recruiters, to trust that the insights we give them are correct and that they can action on them. And so we actually work a lot in the realm of trust. In fact, if someone was to ask me, this isn't like an HR tech application. This is a trust tech application.
Yeah. So how do you go about building trust? Oh, well, let me start with this. What does trust actually mean for your organization in the context of using KANNY? I know this is the UX researcher in me.
The
Is
leaf
like,
that you're,
let's get our
yeah.
definitions right.
No, you're gonna make me stretch on this one. I think the trust is always between two parties, right? Who individuals, a company, an individual, whatever it is. But trust is that there's a mutual practice in good faith of protection and looking out for each other, right? And if you think about it, trust is so powerful. It's one of the most valuable and powerful assets that you or in any organization has with their customers, with other people that you work with. Trust shortens timelines to transactions, timelines to purchases, timelines to doing deals. And if you have that trust, then that is a huge motivator and a huge factor in success. And so, and you know, we think that in the trust economy, there's an opportunity for character data to play a big part in that.
Yeah, I guess in a time when you're thinking, who can I trust and what can I trust? Like I feel like those are very like pertinent questions, you know, not just related to KANNY, but in any sort of interaction that you have in the digital world right now.
Well, and when I saw this data point, it's really sad actually, where it's like 79% of all Gen Z people believe that most people cannot be trusted. I mean, that's really sad. But now, whether we trust Gen Z or not, that's a whole different kind of conversation we can have another day. But that's really sad. I mean, this is your upcoming consumer base. This is your upcoming set of leadership and management and entrepreneurs and political figures. Like this generation is going to be a very important and pivotal one for the world. And they already start behind on trust. And can you blame them? I mean, this is the first generation that can't believe what they see. They can't believe what they hear with the advent of AI and deepfakes and all the technology that's out there. So we have a serious trust problem that is only going to grow as people get better and better at manipulating the technology to take advantage of people.
So how do you build that trust? Like what is the kind of mindset that KANNY has? And it sounded like you were, just to kind of tease out some of the words that you're using, like it was like a two-way street. So you're trying to encourage trust in using your platform, but you're also trying to encourage people to tell you trustworthy things, or to tell you legitimate things rather, right? So you're encouraging people to share things that might be very sensitive, or they may be very apprehensive to share with you, but you also have to project yourselves as a platform that can be trusted.
That's right. So, I mean, it's multifaceted. Number one is all about transparency, right? So we're a startup. We're in the startup world, right? But one of the first things we did was put together a privacy policy. We want to clearly explain to everyone what is being captured and stored and how it's going to be used. You just start there with transparency. We created a trust center on our website, which clearly explains, again, in more detail how we deal with privacy, compliance, and security. And so we start with transparency, number one. Number two is our internal training, right? Even though we're a small team, we all look at and care about how private data is stored and transacted. So we have we put certain principles in place, like, minimum necessary to be able to view and access private information. We use technology to encode and tokenize all of our personal information, so that at any given time, that data is nowhere, anywhere near our system. And so we're able to straight face and talk to our customers and our clients and our reviewers, say, look, your personal information is so important that we leverage and license this enterprise grade technology to make sure that your data is private and secure. And that's a big differentiator for us. I mean, when you go in to a startup and the startup is based and started with privacy thinking up front, a lot of times that's something that's kind of an after the fact technique or an after the fact solution. It's like, hey, we're going to market. What do we have to do? Well, we have to make sure data is private and secure. We started out with that. That was the first integration that we did.
Was that something that was it like a lesson learned from you in terms of maybe you encountered it being more difficult to sell, some of these more forward thinking types of technologies? Just curious, like, how did you get to this place? And I'm not saying that you weren't always privacy focused, but just want to understand the evolution there.
Yeah, sure. No, I would say I was always data sensitive, but I wasn't always a privacy first kind of person. In my last company, we built a SaaS platform that automates remote clinical trials. So we're dealing with medical data of the most sensitive kind, and no one is allowed to see it. And the whole point of clinical trials is that it's anonymized, right? So doctors and primarily sponsors can't see that data at all. And they are very careful about that, and they audit us and all of our privacy and security and compliance footprint. And so actually I was trained early on in this initiative that if you start with privacy now, when you get down the path and when you get to market and commercialization and you start being audited by, big pharma, medical device, academia, whoever it is, if you have a solid stance when it comes to privacy, that's a great foundation that people will appreciate. And so, yeah, I learned early on that you have to account for that and plan for that as you're building around it, so that when you have conversations with customers, we've got that handled. You don't have to worry about that. And that changed a lot of our conversations.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was hoping you were going to touch on is as a business enabler, right? Like how can really focusing on privacy, focusing on protecting the data, how can that be a business enabler?
Well, and if you think about it too, one of the primary stakeholders when it comes to selling technology or solutions into anyone is the IT team or the data team. I mean, whoever that is overseeing that within an organization. And they want to know that you care about their data as much as they do. And so when you're able to talk about using these kind of enterprise level technologies that secure and privatize this data in a way that is informed and educated and kind of forward thinking, then they're able to not worry so much about that and look on and move into the things that are more important.
You mentioned core pillars of security, like limiting access, authorization, building privacy into the product. And then you also mentioned your trust center, which I thought was really interesting. Maybe I just have been around a lot of startups and don't know any different, but I feel like that is a very forward-thinking thing to implement right off of the bat, right? Is building a trust center. So I'm curious, folks listening for their own education, what went into building that? And, what sort of things were you thinking about? Who did you partner with? Like just any sort of learnings that you can share with folks who might want to implement one of their own.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what's called appropriate effort, right? As a startup, we recognize that we don't have a ton to say, but we start putting a stake in the ground right now that we're going to earn your trust. And so when you start with transparency, you start with things like consent, you start with things like, hey, we're leveraging appropriate technologies and have SOPs in place to protect data. All we're doing with the Trust Center is clearly stating our case that, look, what we're trying to do from a business standpoint is fairly provocative, right? It is, hey, we're going to measure character and we're going to do this in a way that can be used and it's at scale and it's with consent. I mean, these are things that are fairly unique and new. So we're having to spend a lot of time educating people on the business concept. With our trust center, it is building that foundation so we don't have to answer questions like, well, how do you keep data private? And how do you keep this secure? And how do you make sure you don't get fraud? And so our job was step one, phase one of the trust center is all about content to help eliminate those initial questions about privacy, security, and compliance.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. You also touched on tokenization. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a podcast for Rixon Technology, which has a tokenization solution. So curious how you arrived on tokenization as the ultimate solution for you, for KANNY.
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. When I was at Thread Research, we were building our SaaS platform from the bottom up, right? It was a brand new idea and an opportunity to engineer something that would really drive the evolution of an industry. And that's called decentralized clinical trials. It was the first time people were really thinking about doing clinical trials remotely. And I remember we had a CTO at the time who came in and was like, listen, our background is not necessarily in protecting this data. So you need to listen and think about how we're going to do this. And he actually brought in Dave over there at Rixon, and he came in and did trainings for our organization about how to deal with privacy and compliance and security. And we were super impressed with that. And he brought in and showed us this new kind of technology that had just come out. And we're talking, 8-9 years ago, he had just come out. And it was, super innovative. And we had a decision to make. It was going to be complex to integrate, meaning it was different than what we were planning. But the complexity of it actually turned out to be very minimal. And it was something that we are so grateful that we did in hindsight, because we didn't really understand or know what those audits were going to be like that we're going to have to go through. And we didn't really understand and know the importance at that moment. We just listened to our CTO and then to Dave. And it turned out to be one of the best ideas we made in building the foundation of this SaaS platform.
Can you speak a little bit more to the audits and the role that tokenization played?
Yeah, so we were, as a life sciences organization, one of the things that we had to prove was that we had what's called a validated platform. And so in order for a pharmaceutical company or a medical device or any kind of organization to come and use our technology in their clinical trials, they had to come in and do an audit. And that audit covered everything from privacy, security, compliance, SDLC, you name it. And the whole point of it was to make sure that we had control over our system and that they could trust us to use their system. And these were pretty intense. I mean, these were 3-day on-site audits, right? But one of the challenges we found was the early auditors weren't necessarily used to dealing with SaaS platforms in the cloud. They were used to dealing with on-prem solutions, and that's a whole different mindset. And so we spent a lot of time trying to educate them that how safe the cloud actually was. Right now, everyone's, of course, we use cloud. But there was a time when that wasn't the case, when on-prem was the thing to do. And so what happened with Rixon is we were able to very quickly and easily set their fears at ease, right? That we knew what we were talking about when it came to securing and making sure their data was private. And it's because once we kind of explained the way a third-party vaultless tokenization system works, which those words together, they'd probably never heard. They heard of tokenization, but not the third-party vaultless type. And by the time we were done explaining to them, it was, oh, this is great. I'm going to have to go back and tell my teams about this. And I'm going to have to go educate my organization about this because you guys are thinking about privacy in a way that hasn't really been thought about in the past. And so what happened was that turned a potential weakness, like everyone struggles, I think, with the appropriate level of privacy and security, into a massive strength. It showed that we were forward thinking in a tech that was so solid, that was so innovative, but also great solution and an innovative solution to what everyone was really clamoring for.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm looking at my notes here. I just want to make sure that I'm staying on track. I know I inserted some questions that I thought were interesting.
That's okay. No, please go wherever you want to go with this. I'm easy.
Awesome. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is you, in addition to running KANNY, you are working with student-led startups who are also leveraging privacy by design and tokenization, right? So they're, ultimately they're embedding privacy into their products. Was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe some of the advice that you're giving your students around these.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do right now is I'm helping out at Lehigh University with a few different initiatives. I've taught in the past some of their capstone classes for computer science, and any kind of appropriate tech that they're using, I recommend something like Rixon specifically to be able to privatize data. And I'll tell you right now, students are not thinking about this. And a lot of times the projects we were working on were with kind of entrepreneurs that were in the area, in the local area, that were working with these students on projects. They're not thinking about it. And so it became a very easy solution for us to implement. I mean, it's a few hours worth of work to be able to implement this security and privacy technology that reduces your footprints of liability and your risk footprints. And so once I kind of talked them through it and showed them how to use it, now all the students are thinking about that. There's 2 projects that I'm working on right now on another initiative, which is our Global Social Impact Fellowship, where we work with students that are wanting to be entrepreneurs, and they're cross-disciplinary, multi-year, massive projects in developing countries. So for example, one of the projects we're working on is in the Philippines, in Manila, and there is a massive tuberculosis pandemic happening there. And one of the challenges there is they're not getting enough data back from the patients that are working and taking these vaccine regimens. And these regimens are not easy. These are 6-month regimens. And so they're looking for, the government put out a post saying we need better adherence data, which is, people that are, how frequently they're taking and staying on their regimen. And we need better side effect and adverse event data. And so my students are working in conjunction with quite a few different organizations over in the Philippines to develop a software application that allows the patients to track that information on their own. For the first time, there's no one in the Philippines right now doing patient collected data. It's all collected by the physician. Now, it's going to have its own hurdles of usage and usability, but I love the way that the students are thinking this way. And so problem number one was, hey, what data are we collecting and how are we securing it? And they hadn't even thought of that. So I had the opportunity to walk them through and say, hey, look, here's how HIPAA works. Here's how GDPR works. And here's what we have to make sure you're thinking about when you're gathering any kind of data associated with, health data. And so put them in contact with Rixon, and you guys were great. You just jumped right in and were willing to help these students and walk them through it. And in a day, we are now tokenizing data. And I can't tell you how many questions we take the students on site for 2 weeks every year. And we're in Manila meeting with, the head of their science and technology for the government. We're meeting with all of their like UNICEF and all these people. And the first question is like, how are you keeping this data private? And we're able to spout it off and we move on to the next thing. It turns this potential barrier into a handled item, right? And then the other project we're working on is it's out of Almaty, Kazakhstan, and they have like the 14th worst air pollution problem on the planet. And the government came out and said, hey, we need to teach our children how to have better environmentally sustainable behaviors. So the students came up with an idea and they built an application, a mobile app that teaches kids outside of the classroom how to develop these behaviors through like games and tests and quizzes and those kinds of things. And it's super fun and innovative, but we're dealing with children data. And so immediately we went through the process and said, hey, what are we collecting and why are we collecting it? And do we need to collect it? And then we said, how do we protect it? And that's where we called Rixon again. They came in, we plugged it in, and now it's just handled. We're meeting with the Ministry of Education. We're meeting with the top universities in Almaty. And when they ask that question, we just say, it's handled. We explain it, and then we can move on. And it gives them confidence in us that we're not just students that are doing this random project. These students are thinking the way a business needs to be run. And that gives us all kinds of credibility when we're out there trying to pitch these projects and build partnerships.
Yeah, I really like how you broke it down to the fundamentals. What data are we collecting? Do we even need to collect that data, right? You can't lose, someone can't inadvertently, share data that you don't have, right? Like it's great.
You don't have, right.
So, and then, for the data that you do have, how are you protecting it? And being able to have a really good answer when someone asks you, how are you protecting that data? And having the students go through 100%. That exercise, that's fantastic. I feel like
it's something that has been one of the joys of my life to work with these students and these young minds over there and help them think this way because it's important.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. So you might have people say like, this is great, but I'm not building anything from the ground up. I'm not a startup, I'm not in this student organization where, I can just literally, spin something up, right? Something I'm working on is like 10, 15 years old. How might they implement some of the practices that KANNY and your students have been able to build into their product?
Yep. I mean, the reality is it's never too late to start. And it's important, right? And so one of the things that I learned in the life sciences space was progress is important. Even if you're not all the way there, as long as you are on a path, or you've defined a path and you're marching down that path and you've set a goal, that's the most important thing. The expectation is that everyone isn't there right now. The expectation is that you care about it and that you know what you need to do and that you're actually doing it. So I would say take the smallest step that you can take. I mean, if you don't have an updated privacy policy, start there, right? And just start outlining and detailing those things. There are ways to layer in privacy and security into your business. Go and find the most sensitive pieces of data and throw it into a tokenization system, right? That effort is not difficult. There are systems set up to just be able to handle that. And so if you're able to just kind of take some baby steps on a path towards this, then when someone asks, they at least know you care. They at least know that you're paying attention. And it's okay to have weaknesses as long as you know what they are and you're willing to talk about them and you're on a path to make them strengths. So that's always kind of been my advice. Just take that first baby step and make it meaningful, and then continue on that course.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you were talking about like just start with a privacy policy. If you start with a privacy policy, at least you're starting to have a conversation with different stakeholders within your organization: legal, privacy, compliance, engineering, like, how, what are we doing with this data? Having these different, these conversations with cross-disciplinary teams, and having, just having those conversations, I think is a great first step. So I think that's excellent advice.
And a lot of legacy organizations don't think that way and aren't having it. And it's overwhelming, right? They've got 15 years of legacy that they have to clean up, when it can really be much better and easier than that, right? Even if you just privacy policy and then create a standard operating procedure that says, this is how we do it today. Like, that is just, like you said, starting those conversations and getting people to talk about it and put it top of mind.
Yeah, that's another great recommendation. Just listing out, how do we do it today? How are we protecting our customers' data? What does that actually look like? And the exercise of actually writing it down, right? And like seeing what that is can be eye-opening, in and of itself. I love that.
So eye-opening. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It can start you down so many different paths.
Yeah. Maybe some you don't want to go down, or you weren't ready to go down, right?
Fact.
Well,
you weren't ready, and now you are.
To kind of bring us back like to the beginning, one of the things that really struck me when we originally had one of our first conversations planning this session was, you said trust is the most valuable asset that we have. And it was very clear to me that you were clear on how trust is integrated into KANNY's mission, and therefore how privacy and security are integrated into KANNY's mission. So I'm maybe this is kind of beyond, this is more like organizational change and kind of pushes beyond the boundaries of just privacy and security. But honestly, I think that is what organizations need. So do you have advice for folks who are like, I think we need a bigger conversation around like, what does privacy and security and trust mean for our organizations?
Yeah, here's what it comes down to. And I didn't realize this. And this is after, a decade of just being immersed by this and learning and screwing things up, like, candidly. I mean, at every level of a business, there's an opportunity to show trust through privacy and security. If you think about it, HR, they deal with a lot of privacy and security issues, and you've got to think about how you're storing and managing and dealing with that data. So if you aren't on a HRIS or a system that helps manage your HR tools, you should think about doing something like that right away. They're relatively low cost, but they deal with a lot of the compliance issues that you may run into, and you put yourself at risk out the way. Like, really, team by team and group by group and department by department, you could pick like the highest risk thing that you've got, or the highest risk piece of data that you store, and wrap a solution around that one piece of data just to kind of get started. And by having those kinds of conversations, it really starts that ball rolling where everyone's paying attention to it. And there's a danger of the pendulum swinging. Like, I've been through that too, where you're like, oh my gosh, we're not doing anything, and now we're doing too much and we can't even move our business forward. Right? I said it earlier, appropriate effort, that swing has to self-correct, and you do exactly what the organization requires and what your customers require and what your people require, no more, no less. So just be careful of that pendulum swing.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to kind of underscore and bring us back to is you're really focused on, so like as someone who has a lot of grounding in UX, I think a lot about behavior change and what drives different behaviors. And by building trust in the appropriate moments of the user experience, you can drive the behaviors and the outcomes that you want, right? Whether that's, security behaviors and keeping your organization safe, or that point, that moment in the user journey where someone says to themselves, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm going to move forward with this. I don't know why they're asking me for this information. I don't know if I can trust them, with this information. They haven't told me what they're doing or why they're asking for it or how they're storing it or what they're going to do with it. So it's those moments, right, where you could gain or lose a customer. And it sounds like that's exactly, those inflection
100%.
points that you're working on.
Well, one of the things that I've learned too, again, in the life sciences space, is the importance of consent, right? With KANNY, we go through the entire consent process, right? This is not done to someone. This is something that someone opts in to do or not. Like, you have to want to and be willing to go through this process. And as part of the consent process, that protects really everybody. And we clearly state that you are in control of your information. You have the ability to get this information. And if you don't really like what you see about maybe your character, you can lock it. You do not have to share it with anybody. And so we think by going through consent and giving control and being transparent all along the way, that we can show to our potential users, to job candidates, people looking for professional development, that we care, that we will protect them, and we will make sure that their data is their data and that they can share it with who they want to share it and not share it with whom they don't want to share it. And that helps kind of build that trust.
I love it. I feel like this is a great place to wrap things up. Is there any parting words you have for listeners?
I will drive it back to kind of what the mission of KANNY is, right? If I have the opportunity to see some of my weaknesses, I want to see them. Not everybody is ready for feedback, I got to tell you. And I've seen my KANNY score, and there are some challenges on there. And those are things that I take seriously, that I have to work on. But I want everyone to remember that if you have an opportunity to get candid feedback from someone, you should take it, right? And that shows your willingness and ability to grow, to learn, to realize and be self-aware that you're not perfect. And these are some of the best indicators to future employers, to your colleagues, to your bosses, whoever it may be, that you're willing to be aware and improve. And so my urge to your listeners is look for opportunities to get feedback, and then pay attention to the privacy and security of where you keep and put your data.
Sean, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. And, I feel like I get a glimpse of the future with what you're talking about. So I really appreciate those insights.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I've absolutely enjoyed this. I'm a big fan of what you guys do over there. So thank you for being a good part.
What's the best way for folks to learn more about KANNY, or if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, go check out our website. Let's start there at www.kanny.com. We just launched a website that has a lot of great information on it, and it should kind of walk you through the path of what it means to either get your own report or use us as a part of your hiring and development process.
And check out that Trust Center.
Check out that Trust Center. That's right.
Thank you again, Sean.
Thanks, Heidi. This has been fantastic. I appreciate it.